The winter night was colder than anyone could remember. The wind moved like sharp knives through the empty land, carrying with it tiny pieces of ice that felt like needles on the skin. The moon was high, shining faintly behind thick gray clouds. The world was quiet except for the sound of the wind and the lonely cry of an animal far away. In this silent land, a woman walked slowly through the snow, each step heavier than the last. She was an Apache woman. Her name was not known to the people who lived in the nearby settlement. She had no shoes. Her feet were red and numb from the cold, and the thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders was no match for the freezing air. Her hair was messy, tangled by the wind, and her breath came out in white clouds. Every time she exhaled, she could see the proof of how cold it was. She was weak, but her eyes still carried a quiet strength. She was alone, but she kept walking. Earlier that day, she had been near a river trying to find a safe place to rest. But the snow was deep and the cold water had soaked through her blanket. The cold had followed her like a shadow. She knew that if she stopped walking, the cold would win. She would fall asleep and never wake up. So she forced herself to keep going, even though her legs trembled and her fingers felt like wood. In the distance, the woman saw a small orange light. It looked like a star that had fallen to the ground. Her heart jumped a little. It was a cabin, a place where there might be fire, warmth, life. For a moment, she was afraid it might be just a trick of her tired mind. She had seen things before, shapes in the fog that disappeared when she got close. But as she took another step, then another, the light grew brighter. It was real. She whispered softly to herself in her own language. No one could hear her words, but they gave her strength. She began to walk faster, her feet pressing into the snow, leaving behind a thin, uneven trail. Her breath became faster, too, each inhale sharp and painful in the icy air. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Her hands sank into the cold snow. For a few seconds, she just stayed there, breathing heavily, staring at that warm light ahead. She wanted to sleep so badly. It would have been so easy to close her eyes right there. But something deep inside her, something strong, told her to get up. She pushed herself to her feet again and started walking. The cabin was getting closer now. She could see the outline of the wooden walls. She could smell faint smoke from the chimney. She could almost feel the heat. The woman's heart filled with hope, but it was mixed with fear. She did not know who lived there. Would they help her? Or would they turn her away? Inside the cabin, a small family sat close to the fire. A man, his wife, and their little boy. The wind rattled the windows, and the boy pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders. The father placed another piece of wood into the fire. He glanced toward the door, feeling uneasy. Winters in this land were not just cold, they were dangerous. People feared strangers who came at night. Outside, the woman finally reached the steps of the cabin. Her knees were shaking, her breath fast and uneven. She raised her hand and knocked on the wooden door. The sound was weak, but it carried through the quiet room inside. The father froze. His wife looked at him with wide eyes. The boy whispered, "Who is it?" But no one answered. The only sound was the wind. The woman knocked again, a little harder this time. She used all the strength left in her body. Then, with a voice that shook like a leaf in the wind, she cried out, "I'm freezing. Let me in. I beg you." Her words were broken but clear. She had learned a few words of English long ago, enough to ask for help. "I'll reward you," she added softly, her voice cracking. The mother pressed the boy closer to her chest. The father walked slowly toward the door. His heart was beating fast. He thought about the stories he had heard, stories of strangers pretending to be weak only to bring trouble. But then he heard the woman's voice again. It wasn't loud or angry. It was small, weak, real. The woman outside leaned her forehead against the door. She was shaking all over. Her hands felt like they were no longer a part of her body. Her lips were pale and her legs could barely hold her up. She whispered something in her own language again, like a prayer to the night. She did not know if anyone would open the door, but she had nothing left to lose. The father took a deep breath. He slowly lifted the wooden bar that locked the door. The sound of it echoed through the room. The mother held her breath and the boy clutched the edge of her dress. The father opened the door just a crack. A blast of freezing air rushed inside, making the fire flicker. He saw her standing there, barefoot, wrapped in a torn blanket, snow stuck in her hair. She looked like a shadow made of ice. Her eyes met his for a brief moment. They were tired eyes, but they were not the eyes of someone dangerous. They were the eyes of someone who had fought to survive and was almost at the end. She whispered, "Please." Her voice was barely louder than the wind. For a few seconds, no one moved. The father's hand tightened on the edge of the door. The mother's heart pounded. The boy stared, wide-eyed, at the woman on the porch. The woman's knees gave out. She fell forward onto the wooden porch with a soft thud. Her blanket slipped off one shoulder and her breath came in short, fast bursts. The man stepped forward, reaching out before he could think. He grabbed her arm gently, feeling how cold she was. It felt like holding ice. He looked back at his wife. Her eyes were full of fear, but also something else, something softer. She gave a small nod. The father opened the door wider and carefully pulled the woman inside. The warm air of the cabin touched her skin, and for a moment, she felt like she was waking from a dream. The heat made her dizzy. Her legs couldn't carry her anymore, so the man helped her sit near the fire. The mother quickly fetched a thick quilt and wrapped it around her. The little boy, curious but careful, peeked from behind his mother's skirt. The woman's hands were trembling so hard that the quilt shook. Her lips were still blue. She held her hands out toward the fire, but she could barely feel it at first. The pain of the warmth returning to her skin was sharp, but it also meant she was still alive. She closed her eyes and breathed in the smell of wood smoke and warmth. The mother poured warm broth into a cup and knelt beside her. She gently lifted the woman's chin and helped her drink. The woman tried to say thank you, but the words came out as a whisper, almost lost in the crackle of the fire. The family said little. The father sat near the door, still holding his rifle, not in anger but in caution. The mother watched the woman with both worry and sympathy. The boy inched closer, curious about this stranger who had appeared from the cold night. The woman sat wrapped in the quilt, slowly warming up. The sound of the wind outside grew softer in her ears, like it was far away now. Inside, everything felt safe. She looked at the faces around her, the man, the woman, the boy, and for the first time in a long time she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. She could not tell them her whole story yet. It was too heavy. It lived in her heart like a locked chest. But in that moment, sitting by the fire, she knew she had been given a chance to live another day. The family did not know her name. She did not know theirs. But kindness does not need names to exist. That night, in a small wooden cabin surrounded by snow and wind, a door had opened, not just in the wall but in people's hearts. The wind outside kept blowing. The snow kept falling. But inside the cabin, the fire burned bright. The Apache woman closed her eyes, holding on to the warmth, to the quiet, and to the hope that maybe tomorrow would not be as cold as today. The night slowly passed, and the storm outside grew quieter. Inside the small wooden cabin, the fire glowed softly, spreading gentle warmth through the room. The Apache woman sat close to the fire, wrapped in the old quilt the mother had given her. Her hands, which had been stiff with cold, were now warm enough to move again. Her eyes were half closed, and for the first time in many nights she felt safe. The father sat on a chair near the door. He had placed his rifle aside but kept it close, more out of habit than fear. His wife was resting near the stove, watching the woman with quiet eyes. The little boy, too tired to keep staring, had fallen asleep in a corner, his head resting on a folded blanket. The woman did not sleep. She kept her eyes on the fire, listening to the small crackling sounds the wood made. She thought about the path she had walked, about the freezing wind, about how close she had been to giving up. If the family had not opened their door, she knew she would not have survived the night. A single choice had saved her life. The next morning, the land outside was covered in white snow that sparkled under the pale sun. A soft mist rose from the ground. The woman slowly opened her eyes. She heard the sound of a kettle boiling and the low voice of the mother talking to her son. The warm smell of bread filled the room. For a moment, she forgot about the cold world outside. The boy was the first to notice she was awake. He smiled shyly and came closer. He didn't speak much, but his curious eyes were full of questions. He held out a small piece of bread toward her. The woman looked at him, then at the bread, and slowly accepted it with both hands. She gave him a small nod. She didn't know many English words, but her eyes spoke for her. The mother came to sit beside her and gave her a cup of warm tea. The woman held it carefully, feeling the heat against her palms. She whispered a soft thank you. The mother smiled kindly. She could see that the woman was still weak, but there was a quiet strength inside her, a strength that came from someone who had learned to keep walking even when the road was hard. The father joined them after a while. He had gone outside to check on the land and the animals. His boots were covered with snow. He sat at the table and watched the woman quietly. He still did not know her story, but he knew she was no threat. She was just someone who had been caught in a cold world, looking for a warm place to survive. The woman slowly began to speak. Her English was broken, her words came slowly, but each word carried meaning. She told them in small pieces about her life. She told them about the winter that had come too early, about the journey she had taken to find a safe place, about the people she had lost along the way. She did not cry. She spoke softly with the calm of someone who had already shed many tears. The family listened without interrupting. Even the little boy sat quietly, his big eyes watching her face. The father did not ask many questions. He understood that some stories were too heavy to be carried all at once. When she finished, there was a silence in the room. The fire crackled softly. The woman reached under her blanket and took out a small pouch made from soft leather. It was old and worn, but carefully tied with a thin string. She held it gently as if it was something precious. She slowly opened it and revealed a single turquoise stone inside. It was small but bright, shining even in the soft light of the cabin. The father, the mother, and the boy all leaned in to look. The stone was smooth and beautiful, like a piece of sky caught in her hand. She lifted the pouch toward the mother. Her voice was soft and warm. She said, "For you, thank you." The mother shook her head at first, not wanting to take anything, but the woman gently pressed it into her hands. "Promise," the woman said. "I said I reward you. You help me, I give you." Her voice carried a deep honesty. It was not just a gift. It was a promise she had made on that cold night. The mother held the pouch carefully. She did not care about the value of the stone. What mattered was the meaning behind it. This was the woman's only treasure, and she was giving it as a sign of trust, as a way to say thank you for saving her life. The mother felt a warmth in her heart that went beyond the fire in the room. Days passed slowly. The storm outside ended, and the snow began to settle quietly on the ground like a soft blanket. The woman grew stronger each day. Her cheeks were no longer pale and her hands no longer shook. She helped around the cabin in small ways, carrying wood, washing dishes, feeding the animals. She did not speak much, but her actions were kind and gentle. The boy liked to follow her outside when the air was not too cold. She would point at birds, trees, and animal tracks in the snow, teaching him words in her language. The boy would repeat them in English. They laughed softly together, even without understanding everything. Friendship did not need perfect words. The father, who had once hesitated to open the door, found himself respecting her deeply. He saw how hard she worked, how quietly strong she was, and how much gratitude she carried in her heart. She never asked for more than what was given, and yet she gave back as much as she could. One morning, when the sky was clear and the air still, the woman stood outside the cabin, looking at the horizon. She knew it was time to leave. She could not stay forever, no matter how kind the family had been. Her people were far away, and she had to keep walking. She had a journey to finish. She turned to the family and spoke softly. "I go now," she said. The words were simple, but they carried a heavy feeling. The mother's eyes filled with tears. She had grown used to seeing the woman every morning. The boy ran to her and held onto her skirt, not wanting her to go. The father nodded slowly, understanding that the journey was not something they could stop. The woman knelt down to look at the boy. She placed her hand gently on his head and whispered a word in her language that meant brave. Then she stood and looked at the mother. She touched her hand over her heart, then over the mother's. It was her way of saying thank you again, in a language beyond words. The turquoise stone remained in the mother's hand, shining in the soft winter light. It would be a memory, a promise, and a reminder of a night when a door had opened to a stranger. The woman wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders again, but this time it felt different. The cold still bit at her skin, but her heart was warm. She had been shown kindness in a world that was often unkind. She had been saved by people who had once feared her. That changed everything inside her. She started walking down the snowy path, her footsteps soft and slow. She did not look back, but the family stood at the door watching her go. The wind was calm that day. The sun was pale but kind, The little boy waved. The woman raised her hand in return, a quiet goodbye. Then she disappeared beyond the curve of the hill. Inside the cabin, life returned to its quiet rhythm. But nothing was quite the same. The turquoise stone stayed on a small shelf near the fire, where the family could see it every day. The mother would touch it sometimes and remember that winter night. Years passed. The boy grew older, but he never forgot the woman. He would tell her story to anyone who would listen. Not a story of fear, but a story of hope. A story of how kindness opened a door and saved a life. The woman's journey went on, though no one knew exactly where. But somewhere on that cold land, she carried the memory of a warm cabin, a kind family, and a little boy with curious eyes. It gave her strength on the road ahead. The wind would blow again. Winters would come again. But the promise made on that night, the promise of a reward of kindness returned, was never broken. It lived on, quietly, like a flame that never goes out. And long after footprints faded in the snow, the story of that night remained, passed from one person to another. A reminder that even in the coldest places, a warm heart can change everything.